And Matthew Good joins us here in studio too. Good to talk to you. I was saying earlier on the show that I have, I've interviewed a lot of artists, a lot of musicians, a lot of artists generally. I've rarely seen anybody who has been as open as you have been, and just even the materials that you produced along with your album, Hospital Music. Mm-hmm. And the letter that you write, I had my producers, 3 of them come forward and say, you have to read this. You have to read this letter. Mm-hmm. Can you begin where the letter begins and just tell people at home what happened?
You're referring to the...
It begins with a beer in the shower.
Oh, yeah. What basically happened was last year I just went through a divorce, and I've suffered from anxiety problems my whole life. And it wasn't until last October that I found out that I suffer from bipolarity. And
but you were being misdiagnosed.
Yeah,
well,
I was completely, but I didn't know that I had it.
Yeah.
It's a very common occurrence for people in their 30s or in their 40s to find out that they actually have it. And when you go back through your personal history, through your pathology, you find out all the puzzle pieces fit. In my case, it was Ritalin in the 70s, and staying awake for 3 days at a time when in my early 20s, and that sort of thing. Not having a normal appetite, things like that. In my late 20s, I started passing out, kind of like Tony Soprano does, just straight out cold. And in 2003, my general practitioner, after I had seen a cognitive therapist, said, well, why don't we try an antidepressant? Because that's always the quick fix in our society. And after my divorce, obviously my level of anxiety grew, and so he upped my dosage. The irony is the drug that I was on actually produces amplified manic symptoms in people who suffer from bipolarity. So to counter that, I was also prescribed a drug called Ativan, mm-hmm. Which counters panic attacks and that kind of thing. And throughout, I guess over 8 months, I got addicted to it, to I guess probably the point where I was taking 5 milligrams of it a day, which is actually quite a lot.
And at the height of it, you were touring, right?
Yeah. And what happened ultimately was I was supposed to go to Europe for 6 months. I was going to live in France for 6 months, and I was going to write a book. And I got as far as England to my friend's place in Bristol, and I just had a complete meltdown there. And I came home 7 days after I had left, and all of my belongings were in storage, and I was at my mother and father's. And my dad had made dinner that night. I had a beer with dinner, and I had a couple more beers watching a movie upstairs on my laptop. And it was just one of those occurrences where I thought, well, you know what, I'm tired and I want to go to bed, and I was feeling panicky.
Yeah.
And the medication that I was taking on a daily basis was really bringing out that mania. So I took some Ativan, right? I took a couple Ativan, and thinking, well, maybe this will put me to, I'll fall asleep, I'll wake up tomorrow morning, and one day after the other. But what happened was, I guess, with the combination of the alcohol, I just kept taking it, and finally I was in this kind of weird, bizarre, manic euphoria where I didn't know what the hell I was doing at all. So I got up, and one of the things I've always done throughout my life, when I find myself in a position of being very anxious or manic, I go and have a shower. I just sit in the shower because I find water very calming.
Yeah.
So I was in the shower, and all I remember is I got out of the shower and I kind of stumbled into my parents' second bedroom, and that's all I remember. I woke up in the hospital after that. And they had said I'd taken in excess of 45 of them or something. So I had to willfully commit myself to the psychiatric ward at the hospital for just under a week, which was the best thing that possibly could have happened, because it was then that I actually got to sit down with a psychiatrist and go through my past history and really discuss it with him. And it became very crystal clear what the problem was. And subsequently I was put on a drug regimen, which within 2 weeks significantly changed my life.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, it's for me, I got very lucky in that sense, because there are a lot of people in our society that might not really have that opportunity, might not be able to afford the drugs because they are very expensive, I live on the Lower East Side of Vancouver, and I often walk out my front door and have conversations with people that are either living on the street or in front of methadone clinics or the rest of it. And these are people dealing with problems that, in a lot of ways, they have no other way to deal with, you know what I mean? Because crack's $10 or whatever, and I sit there and I think to myself, what separates me from them, right? The fact that I can afford medication.
You're also, you're in a kind of a unique position too, because I mean, as a successful musician in this country, as somebody with, a great deal of notoriety and fame, I guess you kind of saw. Did you see the world more clearly, or?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I did. There were a lot of disappointing. Aspects to it. There were a lot of people that had been in my life. I mean, you have to remember, it's a really bizarre thing to be sitting, in a bed in yellow pajamas.
Yeah. It's not a rock star look.
Exactly. Well, it was what it was at the time, and to think a year ago I was, happily married, and my life was on track where I thought. And then for a year later, everything to be in just another state of disaster. Because last year was that way. That was the case. After my wife left me, my best friend's dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and through all of that, and through his dad's illness, he was, a massive pillar of strength for me.
Yeah.
And his father recently passed away, and now his mother's got cancer. And it's just been, it never ends, kind of,
Yeah.
But it's, I don't know. It's really difficult. It comes with its positives and its negatives. I mean, the positives for me were, was twofold. One, finding out that I had the problem. Because not only at the time do you realize, okay, well, this is the problem, but you can then subjectively look at your entire life, or objectively, look at your entire life and go, well, that's, I can look at
looking back, you can see the signs.
Exactly.
It became clear to you.
Suddenly, I can examine my behavior over the last 36 years and go, well, that's why.
So there's some comfort in that.
Absolutely,
yeah.
There is. Absolutely. And the second thing is that being in my position and talking openly about it is helped. I've received hundreds of emails from all over the world, from people who have it themselves, suffer from depression, have family members that do, people who are afraid to tell their parents or their spouse about the problem, and it's something that's prevalent.
Because bipolarity is not something that's really understood.
No, it's not.
It's kind of like where depression was 15 years ago, or 10 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, and actually, it's to a great extent, it is where depression is now.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people still don't understand that, the difference between true depression and, people who just suffer kind of from melancholy, who go to the doctor and get some Paxil, and then they kind of feel better, and then they go off the drug and everything's fine again because they had some stress in their life, right? I mean, there is a significant difference between having a chemical imbalance in your brain and just going through a rough patch.
Yeah, and it is something that you have written about. I mean, what I've read, that you talk about our society perhaps being over medicated. I agree with you on that point.
Yeah.
But on the other point, my gosh, it can do such great good.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's very difficult to to put into perspective what it would be like to have a schizophrenic not be given proper care, right? So there obviously is positives to, obviously putting people on medication who need it, But I agree with you that society has become somewhat slanted towards the quick fix as far as, antidepressants are concerned. Yeah.
So how does it affect your music? And tell me how, I mean, obviously the title, hospital music, and if you read the lyrics, I mean, it's obviously deeply affected by what you've gone through.
Yeah, it was extremely. I wrote half the record before it happened and half the record after it happened.
Could you continue? I mean, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Because you're obviously going to be in a very different frame of mind. That must have been incredibly reflective.
You know what? Yeah, it was. It was funny for me too, because I always thought, that once I got on the medication, I thought, well, this is going to change my artistic outlook on things, right? Because a lot of people who suffer from bipolarity are very creative people.
Yeah. It does go hand in hand.
Yeah, it very much goes hand in hand, actually. Stephen Fry, the English actor, did a fantastic series for the BBC on bipolarity. I believe it was for the BBC. And, he talks to Richard Dreyfuss, Carrie Fisher, Robbie Williams, a lot of people that are entertainers or that are in creative fields that suffer from the problem. He himself suffers from the problem.
Interesting.
And, so I was very kind of worried after they kind of kicked in and things had, gone from there to there.
Because you hear that. I mean, even people who suffer from chronic depression, who are involved in the arts or anything, that they worry that perhaps it's the highs and the lows in some way that propels them forward, that they draw their creativity from.
Yeah.
And they were worried about, the calm. Does the calm still deliver that?
Well,
you would know.
In my case, it's been okay.
Yeah.
In my case, it's been okay. The unfortunate reality is that bipolarity carries with it a significant suicide rate.
Yeah.
And that's not something that, I think that is worth toying around with, the notion of just for the sake of creating, when I have found that I've had no problems doing it while on medication. So, so I don't think that it's particularly affected me. I think it's allowed me to become a little bit more focused. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead of actually waiting for those high times and then producing a lot and then going through those low times and not producing very much or becoming very dour or whatever. I mean, the record itself has kind of that overtone to it, but that's expectant given its subject matter. I mean, the one thing that I wanted to do with regards to the content of the album was to have it be truthful.
Yeah.
Because given what happened and given this, given the circumstances, I think hiding behind metaphors is kind of a pointless exercise.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. I mean, I've done that obviously on every record I've ever made in my life. Most artists do. But in this case, that's something I didn't want to do. And it's also something that, in hindsight, after you record it, you've written it and you think about it in context, right? And you think, well, maybe I shouldn't put this song on the record because maybe it's just a little bit too much.
Too revealing.
Yeah, too revealing. Especially songs like Born Losers and She's in It for the Money, things that talk about marriage and stuff like that, right? And, and then you really come to the conclusion that as an artist, I wrote what I was feeling at the time and, I think I have a responsibility to myself to actually represent that truthfully on a piece of work, so.
Congratulations on your courage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Great talking to you. Actually, could have talked for ages. But there are people who are...